We're now moving on to the final panel session of today, and this is changing the perspective a bit. This is around reaching new markets, what consumers want. So we've talked a lot about how firms need to operate and what they need to do, but to do that, and we've already heard, you need to understand what consumers want. So we're trying to get a bit of insight on that. We've got three panellists here. We've got Rachel Rush, who's founder of Roche Legal. Your journey started onto this stage last year when I met you at our Newcastle event, and you made some particularly good and interesting points from the floor, actually. And we thought, well, it'd be good to get you on this stage because you've got a really interesting perspective from a small firm perspective, but you've done a lot of work in terms of marketing your firm, but also you did a lot with wills and trusts and helping elderly and potentially vulnerable clients, including those with dementia. So I'll be interested to hear about that. Then next along, we've got Kid Harwood, who's a solicitor and director at Wilding Solicitors. He specialises, I think, in personal injury and litigation, but also you're passionate about legal tech, and you set up LawBid, which was a tech platform to try and match solicitors with clients. So you can hear a bit about that. And then finally, we have Mark McLaren, who's a board member of the Legal Services Consumer Panel. For those of you who don't know who they are, they're the sort of there to represent the voice and needs of legal users, presenting that to the Legal Services Board, who's the ultimate regulator for legal services. You can see on his biography, there's a whole list of achievements there, but I think you're at Which for 9 years, where you've had a lot of victories to get a better deal for consumers. So Mark will be coming very much from the insight of what they found out from the consumer perspective. So the opening question I'm going to ask, similar format again, is what do people want when it comes to legal services? And Rachel, could you kick off a bit about yourself and your initial thoughts on that question?
Thank you for the introduction. So I have a small firm based in Yorkshire. We have two little offices, one in York and one in Harrogate. We're a niche firm specialising in private client work, so wills, tax, trust, probate, and interestingly, missing people. There aren't that many firms out there doing that. The Law Society last year called us a glimpse into the future of legal services, and I think partly they said that because we use a lot of tech in our firm, and I do that because what is really important to me is making sure that what we produce to the client is consistent, and I think that's really what customers want, and they want certainty over fees. They want to know how long things are going to take as well. I think they also want an easy entry into a law firm. So what I mean when I say that, they want it to be really easy for them to, for instance, provide us with their information. They want things centralised. They want stuff to be turned around quickly where that's possible. And they don't want us to go back to them 4 times asking them the same question either. So what I could try and do is have everything centralised in a database so that whoever's working on files can really quickly get information if somebody rings. But I think what it boils down to is consistency and certainty over the whole transaction, whether that's preparing a will or doing some sort of litigation.
Actually, you remind I was fortunately or unfortunately using the NHS recently, and I went through about 5 processes where I was asked the same. I filled in something online, I filled in a form, then I spoke to people, and then when I eventually saw the consultant, they asked me all the same questions that I'd filled in there. And that was a perfect example of, wow, there has to be some efficiency here. What was almost the point of asking the question? And it sounds like that's a big thing from your side. So pass over to Kid if you want to give a bit of an introduction.
Thank you for the introduction. I qualified in 2006, and the second best thing that happened was the iPhone in 2007. And what I quickly learned, I mean, my background is PI and litigation, but I was always intrigued as to how clients had found us, and started looking into this. And what I found was that, you know, clients searching, going on to Google, finding out, putting key terms in, and I was always interested as to how and what key terms they were putting in to find us, and really wanted to understand what the consumer behavior was all about. And I quickly came to realize that, you know, consumers wanted to read the reviews, they wanted to see what other experiences other clients were having. The other thing was the price, for example. That's only a recent addition in December. There was never a price on the websites. So it was always very difficult for clients to really find out how much the service was going to cost. And I've always found that even with websites today, bearing in mind this is going back, 2007, a lot of solicitor websites are not even mobile friendly. So what are clients going to do? Well, they'll perhaps, if they're lucky to find your site, well, they'll certainly find the sites of the firms who are spending a lot of money making their sites mobile friendly, looking at reviews, looking at where they are in terms of search engine optimization. A lot of smaller firms weren't really looking at that. The other thing I was looking at was how people, we live in a comparison society, so clients are kind of better informed and are more demanding now than they've ever been. So my kind of point really was to try and see if I can find a better way for the client to access legal services.
And that's why you set up LawBid.
Set up LawBid.
And do you just want to say a brief word about what
So
LawBid
LawBid is a digital online platform. A client simply has to go on, just put in their legal requirement. It can only be just a sentence, and the solicitors will contact that particular client. So for example, let's just say it was a conveyancing matter. A client simply needs to say, I want to sell my house. Solicitors will ask whatever questions they need to. There'll be various solicitors on there giving prices. So what the client has is a quick snapshot of what solicitors charge. So the client has a degree of choice. They can have a look at the reviews of those solicitors as well. So it was a new way, a new platform for clients to find legal services.
Excellent, and we'll explore some of the issues around that in a moment. Mark, do you want to say some opening words?
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction and for inviting me. Just a little extra point about the Legal Services Consumer Panel. It's a creature or a creation coming out of the Legal Services Act. And I guess one of our key roles, I'm a non-lawyer and come from a lobbying background really, as well as other public policy issues, is to balance the sort of market liberalisation, the technological changes that we've just heard, two very good examples actually, with consumer protection. So, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The vision of the Legal Services Consumer Panel can be summed up in three ways. One is a healthy market with a choice of providers, empowered consumers, so they do what you've just been saying, Kit, and then value for money. And by that, its price is obviously a key component. And again, Kit, you mentioned that, but also quality, and that's something I'm sure we'll touch on. I've got in front of me, it's not yet published, but we every year produce a tracker survey on consumer attitudes. So, and I don't have it in the forefront of my mind, which is why I have it in front of me. But there's some interesting things happening which sort of show how things are changing, and in some ways how things aren't changing. It's definitely a curate's egg, because the market you just outlined, both of you have, is I guess what's coming. But what the surveys seem to generally show is that it's not coming very quickly. So, for example, when we did the survey, I think the first one was 2012, about 23% of people shopped around in the way you've just been describing. Now, 6-7 years later, that's risen to about 28%. But the good news in that, if you want more shopping around, is that for the very reason you've just been giving about the iPhone and technology generally, younger people obviously have a much higher percentage of a willingness to do that. Though not actually possibly as high as you might think. 39% of the 18 to 13-year-olds are willing to shop around, or rather do, I should say. And of the over 55s, it's actually quite high at 25%. The average, therefore, being the 28 I mentioned. In terms of how people find lawyers is also interesting, because it's changing, but not very quickly. And you won't be surprised, you'll know this much better than me, that the most common way people find lawyers is through referral. It's recommendations. It hasn't really changed. It's gone from about a third to 35%, 33 to 35 in 7 years. Hasn't really changed. The online market is also expanding, but very slowly. Searching online has gone from 9% in 2012 to 10% now. So it's changing, but I guess the overall message is that it's changing slowly. And a quite amazing statistic, but I think we'll probe this further, is that only 2% of consumers use comparison websites. I'll stop there because I'm sure we'll probe further why that is.
Well, so yeah, I suppose let's go into that. And actually, I might ask the question at the floor. Why do people in the room think that's the case, that all those stats suggest the way consumers are interacting with the legal market is perhaps behind some other sectors where, if I was buying insurance, for instance, a comparison website, I'm sure plenty of people in this room, and insurance can be quite a complex product, even though it's different. Why is it the case that people are choosing legal services in different ways? Is that they want something different, or just the legal services market hasn't evolved to provide that to people?
I don't think the legal market has lived up to the expectations. So the consumer knows, if you look at other service industries, unfortunately the legal industry hasn't caught up yet. So what do you do?
Yeah.
What does the client then do?
Well, we know that most people, 9 out of 10 people, if they have a legal problem, don't end up using a solicitor. So it's not the case that, and that may be due to some of the difficulty of actually finding where to go.
Yes, I think it comes back to the fact that so many consumers rely on personal recommendation, that it is a chicken and egg situation, I'm sure. I was just searching in my survey for a figure from how people choose to have their services delivered. And it actually has changed relatively significantly from 21% in 2012 to 33% in the last survey, which, as I said, is about to come out this month. But still, around half of consumers get their services delivered in person, so it's not shifting very quickly. The other factor is, and I'm searching around in this paper to find the reference to it, is the fact that it comes back to the point that Kit mentioned, and I think it was touched on in an earlier panel, that the search engines don't have the information they need to, in the way the other search engines work for insurance or anything else like that, in terms of information about price, services. There's not enough information for them, and I think some of them have pulled out from the market as a consequence.
Yeah. That's your view on that, Rachel, because obviously I know a lot of your target market's an older audience, so you might say, is it a stereotype, are they less tech savvy or less likely to choose new tech? How do you go about gaining new business?
I'm really interested to hear that your statistics just now, because that's not my experience at my practice, and I don't know why that might be, but perhaps it is because we have quite a decent online presence, and so the people that are shopping around or the people that are on social media are then going to be contacting us, and I think perhaps then those clients perhaps have slightly different expectations to those people that might not find us on the internet. But we are also doing far more work remotely, so we're finding that more people are using our sister site, which is an online will and lasting power of attorney platform, completely online. It is backed by us, and we will interact with people over the telephone if necessary. But we do so much more remotely: Skype calls, email, telephone.
And are people comfortable with that? Because obviously you can save costs through doing that. Yeah.
It's really convenient. So, for instance, with the online platform, if someone doesn't want to take half a day out to come to our offices to provide us with their will instructions, they can give us their will instructions at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, and then it gets dealt with the following day. So you've got to create, what I'm trying to do is create convenience that caters for the modern lifestyle. So the service that we're providing and the documents that we're producing are the same as if somebody would come into the office, but we're just trying to be a little bit more agile, and I quite like that word, because I think the more that we get used to that, and certainly as the market's changing and people are expecting that more and more and more, I think if you can get in there from the beginning, when we are in a situation where it's a bit of a slow burn at the moment, but if you can get all the processes in place to be able to do that faster and faster as the demand gets greater and greater, then you'll be ahead of the game. But just going back to what you were saying about the elderly clients, most of our clients will want to sign our terms of business electronically, and that also goes for people that you might not expect. So a lot of our older clients, they might say, actually, no, please send them electronically because their grandson bought them an iPad at Christmas. So it's really surprising. We rarely send things out in the post.
Does that charm tally with what people in the audience say? The woman over there in the, I called it purple, shall we say lilac this time?
No, I'm intrigued by what you say about taking instructions by phone and by Skype, and I think what you're doing is absolutely great and moving things forward. There is that question, however, about verifying the identity of the person giving instructions, and also, do they have capacity? I just wonder how you're dealing with those sort of nitty-gritty issues whilst trying to move forward with technology. Thanks.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, and I've spent many hours considering this and talking to people, other lawyers who are doing similar things about how they meet those challenges. So we do verify the identity of all of our clients who use our online services electronically. So we'll do an online AML check through a portal. With the capacity issue, if somebody gives us their instructions and we're not sure or we're not happy to accept those instructions, we obviously don't have to act for them. So we're not necessarily taking every instruction that comes in if we feel like it's not in that person's best interest or whatever the case may be. And then we will signpost them to a better way to make sure that what they need meets with their requirements.
So, yes, do you want to come back on that, yeah?
Yes. Yeah, or it might be, if they're not local to us, it might be going to see a completely different firm.
Yeah, Mark?
I was just going to say something which, an interesting thing about how you're using the technology, but what also seems to be the case is, are your clientele generally local? So it's this, what's not changing perhaps is the desire of the consumer to use the local firm whilst wanting to see the local firm using more and better technology. Then, slightly in contradiction to that, I have a bit of an interest in the conveyancing market from another role I have on the property ombudsman. And what struck me about that is that's a market that's full of technological change, that's bringing in, so you can see the chain and all sorts of sort of technological changes. But what's not really changing is the way homes are bought and sold. It's like a bolt-on. And actually that was interesting because when the LSB did their survey about technological change, it said the top barriers were the risks of it. This is not from the consumer point of view, from your point of view as lawyers, the risks of using unproven technology, obviously the lack of IT expertise, the availability of the finance, the cost of it, and then just also the regulatory structure that might inhibit it. And I thought that was quite interesting because it's in conveyancing at least, it just seems there's so many initiatives, there's almost initiativitis of new ways of helping you as lawyers to do conveyancing more efficiently. But what it's not really addressing is actually the inefficiency of the home buying and selling process itself. It's not changing it sort of fundamentally under the surface. So you end up with loads of additional costs of new systems and of new software propositions, and then the next year something else comes along.
Kid, if I bring you in here, and I suppose I just wanted to add to that is, what are you finding on law bid is what people's priority is when they're choosing?
I was just going to say, is it worth perhaps going back to agile? I like that word as well. Because one of the things that the consumer says about the lawyer is the fact that, we're rigid in our approach. So, for example, you're saying at 11:30, and that's what we find with law bid is that, a client can go on and post a matter whenever they want. Because of the clever algorithms and everything, they get a response as well saying, thank you for posting this and so forth. So the client feels that there is somebody there, and then, a solicitor can pick that up at 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning or 9 o'clock, but it's giving the consumer what they want. And I think it's really important that, we know what the demand is, and I feel that the legal industry isn't meeting the demand.
Yeah, I do know, as part of a conveyancing process, several times I had to go into the law firm in the middle of the day because their hours are only 9 to 5 type thing, and obviously that isn't always how people work, or meeting the needs of the consumer. I wanted to, one thing I know, Rachel, you do is you blog and you do a lot of stuff around sort of trying to make things accessible and plain English. How important for that, and there's a real opportunity because it can be a very low budget thing to do, how important for that is that sort of online presence of accessible content in terms of gaining new business?
It's really important for us. So in the really early days, I came across the concept that's called education-based marketing, and it'll be familiar to everyone in the room now because everyone's doing it, and that is all about putting information on your website to demonstrate to people who are coming across you that you are an expert in your field. So it's not only giving the clients the information that they want when they want it at 11:30 on a Tuesday night because it's on your website, but it's also demonstrating to them that you're the right person to then do the job because you've written about it and you must know all about it, which we do. And it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It does take an awful lot of time to do the blogs, to do the social media. And
do you write them yourself, or do you work with somebody to do them?
Yeah, so I don't write my own blogs anymore.
The secret has been revealed.
Yeah. I have someone that does that for me, and we have a process where he will write them, I review them, he puts them in the back end of the website, I then go on, he optimizes the image, and then I click post if I'm happy with it. So I found that as we got busier and busier, and as I wanted the blogs to be better and better, I was just spending far too much time doing them because I'm such a perfectionist, as most of you will be. You know, you want it to be absolutely perfect, and I was spending far more time thinking about blogging than I was doing my own work. So it just became not time efficient for me to do it. But we do post a blog every month. I still do all my own social media. Well, I say that in the last 4 weeks, I have had someone do sponsored posts for us on Facebook. And that's good for things like directing people to landing pages to download ebooks, for example. So we use it for that. Again, it's then giving the clients the information that they need, but also demonstrating to them that we know what we're talking about. And then that just attracts more and more clients, and then they give the ebook to somebody else, and then we get people ringing up asking for hard copies of it. And it's all just a bit of a snowball effect then. And
it's also, we know that a lot of people, if they're after a product, first thing they'll do is Google it. If you've got a blog that people have read, Google has analytics will see that people are generally interested in that, and that gets you up on that. You want to be on that front page, don't you, if someone's interested in the topic you're talking about.
And it's really interesting, actually, when you get the stats back every month, as I do, to see which blog posts and which fact sheets and which ebooks have been downloaded, because the ones that feature higher up in the list, you then want to write more and more content about, because then you're going to get even more people coming through.
And I think that's a really important point, isn't it? And in the past, if you were 20 years ago and you were trying to market your solicitor's firm, you might put an advert in the Yellow Pages and then wait for people to come, and you just are static for a year. And if it hasn't worked, oh, we've wasted our money. Social media, with the analytics you get, allows you to see what is working, what is driving traffic, and what actually is falling flat.
Yes.
So
you can be a far more specific now with online marketing. And you know, you can see how many people have found your website through Facebook. You can see how many people and what they're searching for as well.
And you can target by demographic as well, can't you? So,
certainly with Facebook you can. So I can say, right, I want this post to go out to people between a certain age in this area of the country whose interests are X, Y, and Z. So it is really, really specific. And then you don't spend money marketing to those people who aren't going to be interested.
Who here has who here's law firm or practice has social media accounts? Hands up. And so that's the majority. Who thinks they're using them well and doing the stuff like targeting and getting the data back and analysing it? So a fewer hands, probably half a dozen. That might be just reticence because you don't want me to pick on you. But I think there's a real opportunity there, isn't there, for if you're trying to find out what people want and get your firm in people's face. Kid, do you want to say?
We've got just over 3,200 firms on our panel now, and I would say at least 70% don't attach much importance to their social media platforms.
Okay.
And it's a shock. It's a staggering figure there. I really think that firms need to realise the importance of their social media standing.
I mean, another thing I know that some firms do is if you've got a number of specialisms, having one Twitter account for your firm may not actually cut the mustard, because your personal injury messages are going to be very different to your family law messages and who you want to target and how you want to bring people in. So I know some firms consider actually divvying up their content and their social media presence depending on who they're targeting and what their discipline is. Right, so I'm going to go out to the floor. Have we got some questions for our panel? I've got to say that Leeds was far more vocal than Birmingham, so there's a challenge for you. Yes, the gentleman at the back.
Andrew Welch. It's really a question for Mark and to see how the other industries have handled this issue, because it might not be popular to say it, but we're quite similar to plumbers or electricians, aren't we? It's a fragmented industry, opacity of pricing, it's an intangible product. You don't know how good it is, what you're going to get until you've got it. And the consumer is in a difficult situation to try and find the right. So if I'm looking for a plumber, I face exactly the same problems as if I'm looking for a lawyer. How do I respond to that? Well, I do what you say a lot of people do, and I understand it. You go via recommendation. I just wonder, in those other industries, are you aware of how the market has moved? What's happening with those industries?
Not, if I'm honest, not in any great detail, but I think what you've just said is a really important point. And the good news story is, and it generally comes out in the surveys, is that consumers trust lawyers, and they trust you to be regulated, and they assume that you are, and they therefore assume you know what you're doing. And that's a really good position to start from. What you're touching on, though, in addition to that, is though I haven't quoted all the figures on how people search by price being obviously a key criteria on how people choose, particularly in the consumer-driven markets of conveyancing, probably will writing to some extent as well. I think they're the two biggest. The real issue is quality. How do I identify quality? And on the consumer panel, I think some of our reports that have been issued, we've been accused a bit of just being focusing on price. But actually, we're really keen for consumers to know how to identify quality. And it's a really difficult thing to get across, whether you do it through badges. I know the SRA now requires, or will be.
You've got voluntary at the moment,
Yeah.
but from November the 25th, every regulated firm will need to have this clickable logo on their website showing they're regulated and the protections that brings.
And it's why in legal services we've been a big fan of the Competition Markets Authority's work to get transparency on, well, to begin with on price, which has been mentioned, you mentioned it, Kit, from December. But then we've got to move on into quality. I'd hesitate to compare solicitors to plumbers, but I understand the point you're making. Sorry?
What's the fundamental difference for consumers?
Well, there isn't, I suppose. You just, you don't know what you're not the expert. That's why you're bringing the expert in.
Yeah, Rachel, the other one.
I think the main difference between plumber and a solicitor is that if you know if your plumber's done a rubbish job because your sink is leaking, you don't necessarily know if your solicitor's done a rubbish job because you don't find out until something really does go wrong and then the contract that he or she has prepared for you doesn't work. So I think it is much more difficult for consumers to understand whether what the solicitor has produced is going to do the job or not. It's not as obvious.
Certainly, you're right. It's completely immediate. You would know. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the problems with conveyancing. When there are problems, it may not come to light until you sell the house, which might be many, many years later.
But I also think it's our job as solicitors to communicate to the client that what we are outputting is quality. And I think we need to stop focusing so much on price. I'm not the cheapest firm around, and I wouldn't suggest anybody has some sort of race to the bottom with price. I think that happens with conveyancing. And actually, if you're charging a decent fee for a decent piece of work, I think that does communicate that what you're producing is quality. If you can get a will for £15, then there are going to be lots of people out there who aren't going to believe that it's any good. And they're probably quite right.
And what about sites like FIFO and Trustpilot and those sites which are trying to give indicators of quality of a firm? Who here's firm has listings on things like Trustpilot or FIFO where people can put on their reviews of the firm? I'm seeing some shaking heads. Anyone? Yeah, we've got Rocket Lawyer, the unregulated firm. Gentleman over there. That has grown massively in other areas, and if I'm going to a hotel, I look at TripAdvisor, and I'll probably discount all the ridiculous one-star reviews and discount the incredibly, so passionate it's written by the owner of the hotel reviews, and then try and work out somewhere in between. Do you think there's scope for that to help consumers if you're choosing a legal provider?
I got a call from Trustpilot. They charge something like £1,200, £1,400, don't they?
Well, it's more than
There's free ways of doing it. You don't need to do all of that.
So what would you do?
I mean,
What would your advice be to people to avoid?
I'd have to take you back to the social media platforms, you know, talk about the clients there perhaps, and perhaps testimonials. That always helps.
That works very well for us. So at the end of every matter, the client has the option to provide us feedback either online, or we send them out a feedback card. And actually, clients are really good at returning the feedback cards because I make sure there's a stamp on them. So people feel like they have to. So it's really good because you get lots of interesting comments.
Yeah.
And then all the positive ones we tweet about. So again, we have a little process where the card gets scanned in, Mel will do the post on the platform, and then we roll it out. And we have clients come to us because they have seen our testimonials and they've seen the reviews on our own website. So we just have our own review page on our website.
And when it's so difficult often to find proxies for quality or reputation beyond recommendation, that can make a real difference. Have we got any further questions from the floor? Yes, gentleman there, and then we've got the lady with the pink hair.
Good afternoon, Nick Johnson from Glazes in Manchester.
Hi.
I hear a lot about innovation and technology. I just asked the panel in terms of risk, how we manage risk, because I found with employing more technology and IT that the amount of abuse that is now taking place through modern technology is increasing significantly.
Is this social media? So
Social media, people being sent emails internally about please send money to such and such, and how I'm amazed that people just send money without checking. And I've noticed over the last 6 months significant amount of increase in clients and through third parties informing me of risk and abuse, and I'm not too sure whether the technology is up with protecting the public in line with the way we want to provide our level of services using technology.
it's a good question. I'd give a plug at this point for the SRA's Risk Outlook, which cybercrime, we see some of the worst cases of when things go wrong, and has lots of tips there on how you can protect your firm on that one. But yeah, more generally, how do you manage the risk around technology and all that noise?
I think it just boils down to having really robust processes in place. So, and making sure that everybody follows those processes as well. Verifying all the information that comes through. In terms of general IT security, we went through, in the last 6 months, we did something called Cyber Essentials, which is a scheme backed by GCHQ where someone came in and tested all of our systems. And apparently ours is like Fort Knox, which is great. But I think you have to go through having those types of processes in place and then risk assessing everything every 6 months. So again, I have a process for a process almost, because I have a process which tells me when I've got to then risk assess certain systems that we're using and updating those that file on that particular thing that we're using, for instance.
And just to add, that does make sense. And just to add to that, a lot of the cases we see at the SRA aren't shortfalls in tech. They're shortfalls in training and people, how they're running the process. You can have all the best tech in the world, but if you're effectively, often it's confidence tricksters fooling somebody within a firm. So does anyone else want to add anything on that? We've got another question just come over here. So just the lady just there, if you had a question, yeah.
Well, not so much a question, but going back to the reviews, we rely quite heavily on social media for our reviews. We've got Facebook pages, etc., and we use Yell. But I think a key point is that we really advocate sending out the links for the reviews, but we also respond when somebody does give us a review, thanking them for it, perhaps another comment, so that when you are looking for a provider, it isn't just one-sided. You know, you can see there's a personal approach, and that is something that we receive quite good feedback on. And I think it's worked well for us as a firm, that you can see it's a two-sided approach when they're looking for a firm.
That's a really good point. In fact, I wanted to put, the SRA does a lot of research alongside Legal Services Consumer Panel, we did some research into what clients' priorities are versus what solicitors think clients' priorities are. Solicitors said they thought the number one priority of a client was basically the outcome. What happened with the case? Did you win? Did you get what you wanted? Guess what clients said their number one priority was? It was basically good communication and customer service. It wasn't actually, I don't expect to win, or I make the assumption it's all going to be done in a technically good way. But what I want is good communication and to explain the process. And if something's delayed or something's changed or whatever, there's that relationship there. And I think that goes back to what a lot of the first panel was speaking about, but also this panel. I mean, has anyone got... why do you think there's that discrepancy there between what legal professionals might think about a customer's priorities and what...
I think that's exactly what legal tech is actually now dealing with. It's the fact that, you know, there is that delay and the service is paramount. You know, sometimes if you've got the service right and if the outcome isn't quite what you wanted, the client doesn't mind so much, but the service needs to be crucial, doesn't it?
For me, it just reinforces the point I made a moment ago about the starting point for most consumers is they trust you. And so that's why they focus on the customer service. That also probably creates some dangers with the online reviews and elsewhere, because the reviews are more likely, therefore, to be about, oh, they were rude to me on the phone or something like that, rather than from the profession's point of view, the really key point is, have you done a professional job? So it is a bit of a dichotomy, or a contradiction, I suppose is the right word.
Often a consumer feels with how they feel about an experience with someone, don't they? And that feeling's really important.
And it's backed up if you look at the complaints to the legal ombudsman. Many of them, most of them probably, are actually customer service related, which is another reason actually why we've always, as a panel, generally been in favour of transparency about complaints handling, because you can tell a good story on that as well. Turn it to your advantage in the way I think actually you've just been explaining rather well.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've got time for one more question from the floor. Gentleman at the back in the glasses.
You mentioned having a strong online presence. What's your thoughts on the more traditional marketing? So things like adverts in the local newspapers, radio campaigns. Do you think there's still a place for that, or is it now too expensive?
We do still do some traditional marketing in print. I decided radio was not the way for us though at all, and that's not something I'll ever look at, I don't think. But it is expensive by comparison to using, for instance, like I said earlier, Facebook advertising, because you at least know with that you are targeting people who are likely to be interested or are likely to be in need of your services. If you're just putting an advert in the newspaper, the vast majority of people who will come across that are never going to use your services because they're never going to need it, or you know,
And you don't have the analytics to know whether it,
no,
unless it's people coming through the door saying, I've read that newspaper and I've now come to you. I
mean, one of the things that I am a complete stickler about, though, is every client that walks through the door, we ask them, how did they hear about us? That's so important, because then I know where to put my marketing budget.
And what do they say usually? Quarter. What's the most common answer?
As we're becoming more established, so we've been going 5 years now, we're getting more and more people coming through to us from recommendations from existing clients, but also more people coming through the website.
Okay.
And traditional referrals from other professional service providers. And in fact, the vast majority of clients we get are actually referrals from other solicitors, or solicitors and barristers themselves.
And is that building networks with other firms and partnerships, so there's referrals across? Is that a key part of a good business model?
Yeah, I think the biggest part of my business model is the networking. You can do all the Facebook ads in the world, but I think that it's still all about making and building relationships with other local businesses, people in the community. And that's also part of why we do a lot of community work as well at my firm. It's good for morale and all the rest of it, but it also does have the second prong of helping us to raise awareness of our tiny firm with a tiny marketing budget.
Excellent.
I was just going to add that we've touched on, obviously, about reputation being a key component, price being important, but the third one, supporting very much what you've just said, is specialism. So the marketing needs to be focused on what you're best at, rather than being too generalist, I suspect. That hasn't changed much over the last 5 years. The other things that are high on the list, supporting very much what we've just been hearing, is one is having a local office, and the other is speed of delivery. That's probably perhaps more to do with conveyancing or something like that, where you're looking to buy a home. So those 5 factors, reputation, price, specialism, speed of delivery, and having a local office, have been fairly static for the last 6 years.
Kids, do you want
I suppose you have to look at the demographics, don't you? You know, if perhaps, you know, you trying to, I don't know, seek Will's work, there's no point trying to put it out on the net when you know that, you know, if I can say the older generation, they're not going to be online. It's better to put an ad in the paper because you know that they read papers, whereas the younger, you know, they've got the iPhones and the rest of it. But having said that, actually, we've seen a slight shift in with Lovid.
Yeah, and as you say, there's older people who are getting bought iPads for Christmas, and so that changes the dynamic.
That's a real example.
Yeah.
Somebody said that to me recently.
Yes, no, that's good to know. Well, I think we've come to the end of this session, and again, a real thank you to the panel for all their contributions. If I could ask you to give them a round of applause and show appreciation for that. I just wanted to say a few final words. Firstly, thank you everyone for coming. I've really enjoyed this morning. I found it a really interesting event. However, I have no idea whether you guys have. So one thing we're going to do immediately after this is you should get a survey within your email inbox. We'd really, really appreciate it. It should only take you a couple of minutes. If you fill in that, let us know what worked for you. Let us know what we can improve, because we need to know whether, one, you found this event worthwhile, and if so, how we can improve it. So I'd encourage you to do that. We're going to have there's food and drink available outside. We'd love you to stay, have a chat with us, whether you want to talk about the Legal Access Challenge, speak to one of the panellists, or speak about SRA Innovate and ideas you have. We'd be very happy to do that. And also, just so you know, just to repeat, this event has been streamed live, but it will be on YouTube forevermore, which is a horrible thought for me. My kids will be watching it in 30 years' time and disowning their father. But the reason I'm saying that is I know if you've got colleagues or friends or partners or whoever who might be interested in some of the content, do forward that onto them. But otherwise, thank you again for coming, and hopefully we see you all again soon. Thank you.